Police officers of Reddit, who's the smartest criminal you've ever encountered? 1. Well, there was this one guy, we'll call him Jack. Now, Jack stole stuff, but also involved a lot of people. One time, he was planning to steal a whole bunch of cars, all luxury cars. So what he did was he got his people to call 911, etc. from all different places and countries to tell them that car theft was taking place in multiple places. Oh, and he only used a few people each time, so it was different voices, people, locations, etc. So the police went each time until he actually did the crime, then no one came. He was never caught. When the owner of those cars came, the police didn't believe him. 10 out of 10 genius right there. 2. A friend of my brother moved to Israel where, for a period of time, it was/is acceptable to drive with an American driver's license. He was pulled over for speeding and when asked for his license, gave the officer his Costco card. Costco is a membership-based retail warehouse in the US and a few other countries. The exchange apparently went something like this. Officer: Costco? What is Costco? Friend: It's the state I'm from. Officer: That sounds made up. Friend: There are lots of states you probably haven't heard of. Have you heard of Arkansas? How about Idaho? Officer: I guess not. Friend: Well, I'm from the small state of Costco. The officer didn't have a response and wound up writing the ticket to someone with a Costco driver's license. Friend framed the ticket and still has it hanging on his wall. 3. There's a small tourist town where I grew up that is divided in half by a big river. The only way between the two sides is over a long bridge, unless you go all the way around another mountain pass. These guys called in like 2 to 3 bomb threats to a posh hotel on one side of the bridge. I think they even left some dummy packages. All the police went across the bridge to do crowd control, etc., etc. The guys then called in a bomb threat on the bridge and started robbing stuff on the other side. The police couldn't be positive the bomb threat was real or not and hesitated long enough to give the thieves a head start. 4. Probably someone who committed a crime I never solved. With that being said, I had a guy use a sledgehammer to smash his way through a wall at a Best Buy and steal a bunch of phones and cameras. He was smart enough to wear gloves and a face mask and not touch anything he didn't have to. Alarms didn't go off until he exited out the back door, which the alarm company gets after a minute or two and takes them like 3 to 4 minutes to call in to us, giving him a good 5-minute head start, so he was probably a few miles away before we got dispatched to it. He clearly scoped out the area before doing his deed too. Smart dude. Edit. So, part of the building was built into a hill, so the hole was on the back side of the building along the grade line, but when you're inside the building, it was about 8 feet up, so it was easier for him to leave out a door. Also, the wall section where he broke through was hollow cement block. The portion of the wall below that was poured concrete. 5. Not a cop. There was an incident in Fargo, North Dakota, where a guy wanted to steal electronics equipment. The store had plenty of alarms on it, and generally, cutting an alarm triggers an alarm, so instead he cut all the alarms. This was before cell phones were really widespread, and alarms were usually just connected to the phone line. He found an access point to one of the phone company's big trunk lines. 9 access points. Massive, thick copper cables with tens of thousands of lines running through them. He cut through the whole thing with a circular saw, knocked out phone service to most of the town, and robbed an audio store during the ensuing chaos. There were no leads until a tip came in from another town where he'd pulled something similar. They hadn't been able to pin that to him, but had strong suspicions and he'd relocated to Fargo. So the cops pay him a visit. He refused to let them in because they didn't have a warrant, so the cops left to get one without leaving anyone to watch him, and he split. When they came back, they found the saw coated in copper dust and a lot of the stolen stuff. He was in the wind for a while, but even after he got caught, he had another card to play. While being transported between prisons, he used a key he'd made to unlock his shackles and climbed out of the roof vent of the bus. 6. I have a friend who is no longer a criminal, but committed crimes for about 15 years and never got arrested or even investigated. Some of his highlights: growing weed in a shed on his neighbor's property. The neighbor was old and never left the house. Buying a building under a fake name, taking out huge loans against it, getting the HUD money, and burning it all down. Sold fake raffle tickets to raffle off stuff he never had and never raffled. I can't remember how many times he pulled that scam, but he bought a new car with the money. He moved a bunch of times because people would suspect him of being a con man. His dad was in jail for similar stuff, but he was never even questioned by the police about anything. Now, he has a family and a normal job. 7. Dude noticed that the bank vault had put its safety deposit box in a way that there was a space at the 90-degree point that wall meets wall. He times it on a Friday and climbed and hid in that spot. He had actually rented out a box, which he put a clock which alarms violently to see if there are any sound sensors in the vault. Waited outside. Nothing. Employees close the vault with him inside. He has the whole weekend and gets to knocking the locks out with a hammer one at a time and stole everything. He then replaced the locks back to look like they are not tampered with and jumped back into the spot. Monday morning, the vault is open. Turns out, the bank was doing renovations. He picked that day, throws on a worker's jacket, and literally walks out the bank. Employees did not notice till the first person who came to open his safety deposit box. The lock fell in. They could not identify who did it, and he would have got away with it, save his big mouth. Turns out, he was a hairdresser and kept telling his customers how he stole from the bank, and he was a genius and they will never catch him. Someone snitched and he was picked up. They could not value what he stole as safety box contents are unknown. Because of this dude, all banks now fill the space where the two safety cabinets meet with concrete. Made a movie, Inside Man, loosely based on him. His name was William Smarto. 8. Some fella broke into a jewelry store a couple decades ago. You'd think he'd go for the vault, but instead, he stole the chandelier overlooking the showroom. Turns out, the thing is priceless. Funny thing is we found the owner's daughter half naked in the store in the morning. She claimed she had night walks, and we immediately suspected foul play. Unfortunately, the security camera footage for that night had been removed, so we couldn't verify her story. We let her go and tracked her as we thought she could lead us to the chandelier. Sometime later, she made a trip to Mexico in the middle of nowhere. We thought she stashed the chandelier there, so we set up a raid with the Mexican police. On the day of her arrival, we raided her cottage only to find her sitting around in lingerie with no chandelier in sight. Trail went cold and we never caught the thief, but the chandelier's been reportedly sighted in the German black market. The perfect crime, whether it's by the girl or some probably very handsome, strong, and authoritative individual who probably owns a thriving farm. 9. I worked with this one guy who had a lengthy record. He had a system for getting released if he got caught. After committing a crime, if the police were in pursuit and he knew he was about to be cornered, he would act insane. His girl would play along with it, telling the police that he was off his medication. The police would arrest him, but then send him to a mental ward with papers, instructing the ward to release to police once he was cleared. Once he was in the mental ward, he would cause a distraction that would make the person attending the desk with the file cabinet to leave said cabinet. He would then crawl to the file cabinet, look for his release to police papers, and then would literally eat the papers. When the psych evaluators decided he was stable enough to be released, there would be no instructions to send him to the police, and he would be released to the general public. He did this about 10 times until police officers noticed him back on the streets. This stunt forced the state to change their procedure for detaining mentally unstable suspects. 10. A guy buys and finances a car, doesn't make a single payment, and after 90 days, the repo men come looking but can't find it. Behold, over 1.5 years later, an auto repair and customization shop files a mechanic's lien on the vehicle for over $15,000 of custom rims, tires, upholstery, engine work, and a completely awful paint job. So the auto finance company is not going to shell out $15K to get this now non-desirable car. So they sign the title over to the mechanic, who just happens to gift the car to the original owner. The original owner's credit is ruined, but what does he care? He has a brand new car, which he had been driving after about 6 months of hiding it. Pure effing genius. 11. A guy I went to high school had been stealing from Walmart in a pretty clever way. He would grab video games, MP3 players, beer, etc., and then throw them away in a trash can in the garden section. The workers never checked the trash contents, and he would just wait, sometimes 5 hours, until they empty the trash in the back dumpster and hop in to get his items. Once, he took a cardboard box from a display inside, filled it with video games, a PS3, and extra controllers. He grabbed some tape and pens and drew all over the box and taped it up to make it look used and tossed it. An hour later, he had a whole new PS3 and stack of games. 12. We got called for a rollover car accident. We get there and the car is empty, so we think he got ejected. My partner and I start looking for a body nearby. A few minutes later, a cop tells us that they think the driver is a mile down the road walking. We go check on him and he tells us he's fine, but he wasn't driving the car. He also didn't know who was driving the car, and he had clearly been drinking. During a ride to the ER, he told me that as long as the cops don't find you in the car, the local DA won't pursue drunk driving charges. All you had to do was get out of the car and walk away from it. 13. One guy would print barcodes, bring them into Home Depot, and stick them on merchandise in the $100 range. When scanned, the items came up around the $10 range. Putting random barcodes on things isn't really illegal and super hard to notice. Guy 2 would come in an hour later and buy the underpriced stuff. Complete plausible deniability. They would then sell the stuff on eBay. Only reason they got caught is because the guy with the barcode printer / software cut the second guy out of the operation. So guy 2 stole a bunch of barcodes, put them on the merchandise, and paid for it immediately afterwards. He then proceeded to rat on the first guy and spilled the beans that they had been doing this on a weekly basis for over 4 years. Because we could only pin the one case on him, the burglary was dropped down to a petty theft, and he walked away with a few days in county and a small fine. Dude probably took Home Depot for tens of thousands over the years. 14. Friend's older brother and friends used to rob cars. Never did it anywhere except for movie theaters. Guaranteed those people aren't coming back out for 2 hours. They'd take their girlfriends, 2 guys, 2 girls, wait in their car, hanging out until they saw a car with too much money, usually booming bass and loud music, which guaranteed a few grand worth of stereo equipment. They'd wait until the driver went in, give it another 30 minutes just to be safe, all walk over together and use a center punch to knock out the driver's window and push it into the seat in one piece. Immediately, they'd open the doors and cut the alarm wires if there was an alarm going off, and just start hanging out. Even if someone in the lot noticed the alarm and turned to look, they just saw 2 guys and 2 girls near a car with the doors open, looking like the driver was a dumbass who forgot to shut off his alarm, which was confirmed when it went off in a few seconds. Then they'd proceed to just clean out the car. Usually amps, subs, speakers, etc., right in broad daylight. With 4 of them, it just looked like some guys working on their stereo. They'd close the doors and then leave. They did this for a year or 2 before eventually getting caught because a father was waiting for his kids to come out and saw the entire process happen. They did some time. It was one of the smartest, stupidest things I'd ever heard about. 15. Stopped a guy at night, willingly pulled over, was Mr. Nice and had an answer for everything. Mistake was he left night vision on the dash, which have me grounds to search. Had a perfect toolkit for high-end brakes, radios to reach others in on the act, thermal suits, etc. Barrister turned up to interview. Offense of going equipped never stood a chance. He was released. On his way out, joked he hadn't been stopped in 10 years. Even complimented me on being proactive and observant. Record showed loads for burglary and then nothing since 2002. 2 months later, a camouflage server site down the road was hit. $1.5 million in kit went. Police didn't even know it was there. ISP had no idea how the alarms didn't go off and how such specialized kit was difficult to sell. Knew exactly who it was, but zero proof. Nicest prisoner I ever had. 16. I remember some thieves would go and trigger the alarm of a vacant Blockbuster after they all started closing down. They did this for 2 weeks straight, so I guess the cops became convinced that this was a false alarm going off at the exact same time every night, so they stopped rushing to investigate. One day, we find out that the pharmacy next to the Blockbuster was broken into through the wall they shared. Not only that, but there was only one tiny section the wall wasn't covered in shelves and panels in the pharmacy, so the thieves had to know exactly which part of the Blockbuster wall to break through. Still pretty impressed by the heist these junkies managed to pull off. 17. Not police, but corrections. The smartest prisoner I've ever encountered was also the only legitimate psychopath I've known. Young, charming, attractive, and bordering genius levels when it came to law. Some people waste time when locked up. She didn't. Every night was spent studying law books religiously. For those unaware, U.S. inmates are granted access to a law library to work their cases. In the course of a couple years, she ditched her personal lawyer and started representing herself successfully, writing motions, appeals, and making a killing doing the same for other inmates. If there was a technicality to be found, she found it. I imagine these are the kind of folks that end up corporate lawyers. While incarcerated, she always had a steady stream of drugs, even when in isolation, primarily cocaine. She'd instigate officers and inmates alike, create a situation, then bring a case. You had to document everything with this girl. When you're accused of misconduct and cannot prove beyond any doubt otherwise, you become a liability. Several good officers were terminated during her stay. Requests to transfer her to other detention centers in the state were denied as no one was willing to take her. She ended up successfully dodging prison and being sent to a drug treatment center. Prolonged cocaine use took its toll and she had a massive stroke in her mid-20s, leaving her partially paralyzed. That didn't stop her though. During an altercation, she got out of her wheelchair, picked it up, and beat another prisoner nearly to death with it. That's been years ago, and I have no idea whatever happened to her, as I left that line of work. 18. My friend's dad was a cop, and he used to tell me all kinds of stories. There was a guy who was in a local drug organization run by the Irish who had a fake FBI badge, and he flashed it everywhere when he was around cops. He would sometimes give wrong tips to the cops, leading them in the wrong directions. Then he would quickly leave the scene and act as if he had to do something important. The guy would be involved with smuggling and carjacking and murder and everything, but the second cops arrived on the scene, he would just tell them that a source tipped him off this was happening and flash his badge, making it seem as if he had just got there before them. Apparently, this only worked for a few months, but he said finding out that the FBI guy they worked with was actually a member of the mob was the most embarrassing moment in their department's history. 19. We had a guy come into our shoe store when it was super busy, and he asked to see a pair of shoes like any other customer. They were decently expensive shoes, probably $100 plus, and this was maybe 12 years ago. We were busy enough to be juggling between customers, and were running back and forth all over the place and understaffed for that kind of rush on a weeknight. Guy sees we aren't paying attention, so he puts the shoes on and walks up and down a couple of times as if he's testing them out. Once no attention is on him, he sneaks 2 random display shoes in the box, covers them with the tissue paper all nice, and walks right out of the store without us knowing and out of the mall. We think the shoes are in the box when we pick it up to put them back. Worker checks the box just before it goes back, but the guy is long gone. We check under the benches and also find an abandoned pair of old busted shoes he came in wearing. 20. Having worked as a disciplinary officer in corrections, I have always been amazed at the ingenuity of inmates. The problem most run into is the follow-up of the crime they commit. Our department received a call one night that there were 3 of our inmates walking down a street a short distance away from our jail. The 3 were caught quickly. They were still wearing their stripes. However, upon doing a roster check, it was discovered there was still one missing. He was caught about a month later. So the ingenuity was more in how they escaped. They were housed in one of our maximum security tiers. After lockdown, there is really only one way out of the cell. There is a very narrow window in each cell overlooking the yard. This was never really seen as a viable escape risk, as they were so narrow one would have to be really skinny to even attempt to try to squeeze through. Due to lack of staffing, our guard towers stay unmanned, so they took note of that. They spent a year losing weight and observing the officers that worked the tier, taking note of which ones were lax in their duties. They loosened one of the windows, and when they finally reached a weight where they could all fit through, they took their opportunity. The officer on duty that night was so lax, he didn't notice that 4 men entered a 2-man cell at lockdown. Not just that, he didn't do a roster check at lockdown. So they got out and used a mattress to climb over the razor wire. The problem is they didn't have a good strategy for after they escaped. The one that was out the longest was probably the smartest, as he decided to part ways with the three who felt like it was a good idea to walk on a street in their prison stripes. But he had no real plan either. He spent his time living in people's fishing camps when they weren't around. He was caught when one of the campers surprised him and called the department, who was able to locate him shortly thereafter. 21. Couple guys came into my old work and stole a grand piano. We had a piano which was never played, so the boss decided to sell it off. Had arranged for a company to come lift the piano, and with a lot of people coming in and out of our work, the topic of the piano, so someone obviously caught wind the piano was moving. Come lifting day, a Luton van came in and two guys in high-vis vests got out and mentioned they were here for the piano. They took a good 15 minutes to get the piano out of the building and into the van, and even members of staff assisted with them. They jumped in the van and sped off. No one thought any different and didn't sign anything to say the piano had been handed over. About 40 minutes later, another Luton van turns up. Two guys get out and mention they're from the moving company and is here for the grand piano. A lot of confusion around work and laughs, thinking someone was at the wind-up. Long story short, the guy who bought the piano never got his piano. 22. The smartest criminals are ones none of us know about. Often, we don't even know a crime was committed until it's way too late. My friend was a vice cop and once told me about a guy who was the largest drug trafficker in the state. By the time they realized who it was, he had left the country and presumably was living under a new identity somewhere in Europe or Asia. This was 9 years after he handed down the business to the people who worked for him. They estimated that when he left/retired, he had no less than $200 million somewhere. They've never been able to locate it.